I'm a 32-year-old female, and this is something that happened to me earlier this year one night. My husband and I were on the porch smoking a cigarette around 9 p.m. We live far out in the woods right off fast stretch of highway that's between two interstate exits. We were looking up at the stars, enjoying the quiet atmosphere of the crickets and sitting around the fire. I heard something and it hushed my husband so that we could hear more clearly. We were able to hear a woman screaming like nothing I had heard before. Like she was getting murdered. In between blood-chilling screams, she was yelling out, "Help me, help me." I looked at my husband and we were both really freaked out. The more she screamed, the closer she was getting to our house. I could eventually see a figure running along the grassy median area of the highway, making their way closer to the part of the highway that was in front of her house. Our house is a good way back from the highway, since a long driveway, but not far enough that we couldn't see the highway. If we could see her, that she could see use, especially with the fire blazing. We could still see the highway perfectly fine due to the house across from us, who still had their Christmas lights up. It threw my cig in the fire and went back near the doorway of the house to grab me phone to call 911 when my husband ran past me inside to get his jacket and shoes. It told him not to go out there, but he ignored me and got dressed anyways. So soon as she was inside the house, is a weird car barrel up the road and pull over next to where the lady was. With her being in the median, there was still a stretch of grass between her and the car because of a ditch that was basically uncrossable for a car. There was a man driving. I couldn't see what he looked like, and I only heard his voice. He was yelling that he was going to kill her, and he called her many degrading words. I won't repeat it. It looked like he was throwing stuff at her out the window, maybe clothes, sort trash. I couldn't tell too well. As soon as the screaming woman saw Wim pull over, she started running straight towards our yard. By that time, I was already on the phone with the police officers, but as I said, I live out in the woods pretty far from the nearest town, so it would take them all to get there. My husband, who had finished putting on shoes and a jacket inside, ran into the yard towards her, asked if she was okay, and she said that she had gotten a ride home from this guy, and halfway down the road he started acting really creepy. He refused to let her out when she wanted him to and kept driving with her in the car. Tone point, she had glanced into the back seat and saw a roll of duct tape. Fearing for her life, she jumped out of the moving car and just started running down the road screaming for help. My husband brought her into the house and called the police again. Having gathered more information that I wasn't able to give them when I called, they told him to stay on the line with them until an officer showed up inside. Now in the full light we were able to see the woman, and her face looked horrible. She was red and bleeding in a couple of spots with road rash from when she had jumped out. She also said that the man in the car had hit her before she was able to escape. We locked our door and stood together near the window waiting for the police to show up, while my husband gave updates and answered questions on the phone with 911. Basically, he was just telling them that their car was still parked on the highway and that we didn't see the man anywhere. I was trying my best to stay calm and care for the injured woman when there was a loud bang on our door. The man outside was there yelling, "I know you're in there. Is all you're unning," and he mentioned that the people inside can't protect her. He shouted through the door that he needed to leave our property, and he was smart, he would get in his car and drive off before the police showed up. The answer he gave me was not what I was expecting at all, and probably the worst response imaginable. "Hey, I'll go ahead, call the police. They won't be here in time." Then he started to pound and kick a door, trying to break it down. The woman was freaking out and crying, saying, "Help me. Please help me," over and over again. I ran to the kitchen and got a large knife, just in case. We had a huge solid iron door, but her windows were easily breakable if he trying to get in badly enough. He certainly could. My husband went to her bedroom and got this gun when a squad car pulled up in the yard, finally with two more following behind. The man took off on foot running. Some of the cops tended to the woman and got her home safely. The other group of officers searched the woods for the man and finally found him after 2 hours of searching. Needless to say, it turned out to be a scary, eventful night, and I'm glad the cops showed up before the man thought about breaking through our windows. At that point, my husband might have been forced to shoot the man, but I'm glad it didn't escalate to that point, because it would have been a very traumatic experience for everyone involved. This happened to me in the fall of 2020 during the COVID pandemic. My friend, who for the story I will call Jay, and I were on our way from New York to Michigan. We were going to do a couple of flooring jobs and also scout some potential properties to renovate and flip. We were using his work truck for the trip, which was a Ford F-150. We decided to leave in the evening and make the drive all night to get to our destination. Some of our trip was on a 2-lane highway that passes through the mountains of Pennsylvania. The highway is far from safe with elevated mountain terrain with constant turns, and it snakes around a lot anyways. I was driving while Jay tried to get some sleep in the passenger seat. He stopped at a gas station, tore fuel, and ran into the store really quick to get some drinks and snacks for the road. It was a little past midnight, and I noticed another car fueling a few pumps away from us. It was our burgundy SUV, but I paid it no attention as I ran back to the truck. Fast forward 30 minutes later, and I was cruising in the left lane going 90 miles per hour. I noticed headlights behind us, and it was the same red SUV from the gas station. I first didn't think much of anything about it, but it dawned on me that this guy had been following me since the gas station. I decided to do a quick test to see if I was being tailed or not, since I was going 90 miles per hour consistently. Is slowed down to 70 and waited to see if the red SUV would pass me. The guy in the car also slowed down with me now, and I was on alert of being followed. I woke up Jay and told him of the situation. Jay is an ex-Army Ranger who's a lot more vigilant than me and also crazier. Immediately he said, that car from the gas station. I noticed the guy was looking at you extra hard when you passed by him. Jay, being who he was, wanted me to do more tests to figure out what was going on. It told me to switch lanes, so I did immediately. Their SUV did as well. Jay advised me to pull over to the shoulder of the highway and come to a complete stop, which I did. Once again, this psycho who was following me slowed down and parked behind us. Jay was fairly confident that this man had a firearm on him because of the fact that he was confident enough to pull up behind us on the side of the highway. I quickly took stock with what we had in the truck that we could use as weapons. We had a hatchet, 10 ammunition, and each of us had a folding knife with us but no firearms. Jay instructed me next to pull out quickly and gas the car back up to 90 miles per hour. I pulled off the shoulder and stayed in the right lane as I pressed down hard on the gas, but the SUV stayed right behind us. Now, Jay wanted me to brake check the guy so that he would crash into the back of us, then charge the SUV with a machete and a hatchet and hope for the best. That was very hardcore for me. And it told Jay we weren't going to do that at this point. The man behind us wasn't an active threat yet, but if he tried to ram our truck or shoot us, then it would be a different story. I asked Jay if he could think of any other way that we could get this guy away from us. Jay looked around inside the truck and grabbed a high-powered handheld spotlight. He opened the back window of the truck and tried to get a good look at the guy. Had turned on the spotlight, and I guess it couldn't have been too surprising, but the guy's front windows were heavily tinted, so we couldn't get a look of his face. I had an idea, and I quickly swerved over to the left lane as I did that. Jay turned on the spotlight again, hoping to see the man through his side windows. I briefly turned my head at the same time. Jay shined the light at the side of the SUV for like 3 seconds. We had him illuminated, and I will never forget the look of this guy. He was tall, at least 6.5 feet, because he was hunched over the steering wheel. If I had to describe what a crazy serial killer would look like, it was this guy. Just crazy hair, crazy eyes, and the most disheveled face I've ever seen. The light and darkness could have made it look worse than it was. But this guy looked very dangerous. Once the man saw that I wasn't alone, and he knew what we looked like. He exited off the highway at a truck stop. Restary at this day, me and Jay get into a debate about whether he should have brake checked the guy or not. Is under the impression that the guy was a serial killer and that he would just end up finding another victim. I still stand on the side where purposely getting into an accident with a guy like that could go wrong in so many ways, and that it wasn't worth it. However, I agree with Jay that this guy's intentions were evil, probably robbery at the minimum, kidnapping and murder at the worst. I'm just glad that we never had to find out, and I hope that nobody else has to deal with him alone. It was a cool night in the fall, around 1 a.m., and I was driving on lonely backwoods highway in northeastern Wisconsin. It's a quiet road, barely used except for farm equipment and occasional trucks. It was close to my home, and I was out for all at night drive listening to music, which I did often. I was heading down that long stretch of highway that cuts through some swampy woods. There are deep ditches on either side, and when it gets dark you have to keep your eye out for deer. I'd driven down this road many times, and tonight was no different until I hit a patch of ground fog. It wasn't thick, but enough to make the headlights bounce off and mess with the visibility for a few seconds. As I drove through the fog, I kept my attention focused on the ditch nearest to me on the side of the road to make sure that I could see a deer through the fog. As the fog cleared, I saw something that creeped me out. There was a figure crawling out of one of the ditches. I remember thinking it was a person, but something was off. It was moving in a strange way. It was crawling with no legs, just digging itself out of the ditch. The way it moved wasn't natural. It was more of a spasm than a crawl. It happened very quickly, and just as I passed, it disappeared. I couldn't make sense of what I had seen. I wasn't tired, drunk, or anything out of my normal state of mind. I told myself it was probably just my eyes playing tricks on mine, the fog or something. For days after I kept thinking about it. I drive around the long way home from work to avoid that road. It wasn't event that far from my house, but I couldn't bring myself to go back down it. Then a week or two later, I was working out in the fields with my boss. We had to drive down that road to get to the field that we plowing. I'd been dreading it, but I didn't have a choice on the way there. I figured I'd mention to my boss what I had seen. Maybe he'd have some logical explanation since he drove down this road often as well. So I told him about what I saw, the figure with no legs crawling out of the ditch. Moving in that weird jerky way, he stopped for a second and gave me this look like he was trying to figure out if I was messing with him. Finally he said, there was a farmer around here years ago who died driving his tractor down the road. My boss explained to Matt one night the farmer lost control and rolled his tractor into that same ditch I had pointed out. It had gotten crushed under it and died. I wasn't expecting that. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't heard anything about that, but it made sense in a way. I didn't ask my boss for any more details because I didn't want to know more or think about it anymore. I'm pretty sure that I saw the farmer's ghost crawling up out of the ditch late that night when I was around 18 or 19 years old. A group of my female friends and I drove to a nearby city in Washington state for a day trip after every long, tiring day. We piled into the car around 9 p.m. and headed back home. We were driving along the highway, which had no lights and was surrounded by forest on both sides. So eventually a white car was quickly approaching our car from behind. Because they were speeding, we thought nothing of it, and my friend who was driving the car got into the right lane to let them pass, which they did on surround us. They stopped speeding and started doing the speed limit. None of us at that point thought anything was out of the ordinary. We were all pretty oblivious because we were talking to each other and having a nice time until I randomly noticed that we didn't seem to be going as fast as we should have been. I looked to the front to check the speedometer and noticed that we were only doing about 45 miles per hour, which was 10 under the speed limit. I eyed the car in front of us and wondered out loud why they been speeding only to stop speeding and gounder the speed limit on, so they were in front of another car. Everyone pretty much wrote it off as being strange, but we went back to talking for a few minutes. But the person in front of us then slowed down to 40 and then 35 miles. At that point, our driver was getting irritated, so we were all completely focused on the car in front of us. Now the car in front of us then proceeded to slow down to 20, 15, and 10 miles per hour before eventually just stopping right there in the road. We were all pretty freaked out by this point, but still tried to be calm. Andrational West started to wonder if maybe something was wrong and they needed help. However, we were doubtful because we assumed that they most likely would have tried to pull over to the side of the road. If that had been the case, from behind, another car started approaching in the distance. And the car in front of us started to drive very quickly up to the speed limit. This is when we started getting really scared because it was very suspicious as the other car passed the front car. My friend tried to stay behind the one that had just approached, but the car in front of us wouldn't let us by and was staying exactly even with our car if we sped up or slowed down. So because of that and fearing an accident, our driver got too scared to try to switch lanes and backed off as the car disappeared ahead of us. When we were alone with the original cart, they once again stopped in the road. One of my friends suggested that our drivers peed around them, but I said no because I was afraid that they might try to ram us off the road if we attempted to pass the way. As a wit, being behind them was the only advantage that we had. Not one of us had cell phone reception, either, which made all of us far too aware that it was truly like a scene straight a horror movie. We finally made the decision to do a U-turn with the person still just sitting ahead of us, so we sped off in the opposite direction as fast as we could. The first chance we got, we pulled over to the side of the road with our lights off in one of those growly areas that a lot of semi-drivers resting so that we could wait for another car to come by. Finally, after something like 20 minutes, we saw a semi coming down the highway. We pulled out in front of it and made sure that it was enough room between us and the semi for another cart to get through. Sure enough, as we reached the spot we'd been, the car was still in the same area going under the speed limit. When they saw us in the approach, they started speeding again and disappeared ahead of us. We didn't see them there to the drive on the highway, but stuck by the semi-TR. Just in case, I will always think back on that drive wondering if we escaped something horrible or if it was just a group of people playing an extremely mean and terrifying prank. It was about 11:30 at night, and I was driving down a rural highway coming home from work. The road was dark and empty, just like they always are out there in rural southeast Texas. There are no streetlights, and the woods are pretty close to the road on both sides. It's a bit eerie, but I've driven these roads 100 times, so I don't really think about it too much. I had about 2 miles to go before I would be home. I was just zoning out thinking about the day when I saw something moving in my peripheral vision. At first, It thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something, but I realized that it was running alongside my car. It wasn't a deer. Thought this thing was huge. I didn't want to look at it at first, but I couldn't help myself. I glanced over and what I saw still makes my skin crawl. It was running on all fours like a person trying to move like an animal, but it wasn't a person. It was way too big. Its body was thin, and the skin hung off its frame like it was barely hanging on. It's almost like it didn't have any muscle or flesh, just bones wrapped in loose skin. It didn't even appear to be running fast, but it was keeping pace with my car. I was going about 45 miles per hour, and it was just running with me, barely off the side of the road, not struggling at all. I couldn't make out its head because it was taller than my car, and I didn't even want to try to look long enough to figure out if it had done. I couldn't tell much more because of how it was angled, but that's the best description I have. My heart started pounding and I had no idea what to do. I was scared to stop, but I also didn't want to keep driving, not with that thing just there next to me. I tried to keep my eyes straight ahead and keep driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was getting closer, moving in a way that made me think that it could have jumped on my car if it wanted to. It tried to tell myself it wasn't real and it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I knew better. Finally, right before I had to turn onto the road leading to my house, it disappeared into the trees. I have no idea how it moved so fast, but it just ducked back into the woods like it knew exactly where to go. I don't know what that thing was, but I couldn't bring myself to look back when I pulled into my driveway. I sat there for a minute before I even got out of the car. I've never been that scared in my life. I don't know what it was, but I hope I never see it again. Something's out there in those woods and it creeps me out. How close to my house I saw it for.